What do you do when the truth you fought for ends up destroying you? Marla Dean believed in justice with her whole being. She wasn't just another lawyer, she was someone's last hope. But the day a little girl died under state care, Marla exposed the truth. And the system didn't applaud her. They crushed her, labeled a liar, stripped of her license, forgotten by the very firm she once helped build. Now, she mops their floors in silence, her brilliance hidden beneath rubber gloves and night shifts, until fate throws her face to face with the man who could have saved her reputation, but stayed quiet. What would you do if the person who watched you fall suddenly asked for your help? Would you turn away and protect the fragile life you've rebuilt? Or would you risk everything again for one last shot at being heard? This isn't just about revenge. It's about dignity, about the quiet fire that never truly dies. If you've ever been betrayed by something you believed in, this story is for you. Please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because some voices don't fade. They wait for the right moment to rise again. Now, let's begin. The rain was steady that night, not a dramatic downpour, just that slow, soaking kind that clings to everything: buildings, coats, thoughts. Manhattan glistened beneath it, street lamps reflecting off slick sidewalks like candlelight on broken glass. Elliot Grayson stood under the concrete overhang of the parking garage, his navy suit damp around the cuffs. He checked his watch, 10:39 p.m. Too late for the subway, too early to admit he was tired. His shoes echoed as he crossed the garage floor, past rows of quiet luxury cars, all status symbols in hibernation. His Bentley sat in the far corner, sleek and silver, like it always did, reliable, predictable. Just as he reached into his coat pocket for the key fob, a sound cut through the stillness. A voice, soft, but urgent. "Don't get in the car." He froze, not just from the words, but from the way they were said, not like a warning, more like a plea. He turned. Near a support pillar, half shadowed by fluorescent light, stood a woman in a Navy janitor's jacket. Her baseball cap was pulled low, and strands of damp hair clung to her cheeks. In one hand, she held a mop handle upright, almost like a walking stick. "I said don't get in." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "Something's wrong." Elliot stared, unblinking. "I beg your pardon." She pointed. "Under your car. Look." He hesitated, glanced at the concrete beneath the Bentley. At first, it looked like any rainwater trail until he crouched. The line wasn't just water. It shimmered thin and clear, like glass. And the scent, chemical, sharp, brake fluid. He stood up slowly, something cold forming in his chest. "How do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice calm but tight. The woman didn't answer right away. She shifted on her feet, eyes scanning the garage like she was expecting something or someone. Then she said simply, "Call a mechanic. Don't drive. You won't make it to the end of the block." "Who are you?" But she was already walking away, her shoes squeaking against the wet floor. She didn't look back. She moved with urgency, disappearing into the stairwell like smoke. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Elliot with the faint echo of her words, and a very real trail of brake fluid. He stood still for a moment. Then he reached for his phone. 15 minutes later, a technician crouched beside the Bentley, flashlight in hand, muttering under his breath. "Well, hell," the man said finally. "You're lucky someone stopped you. These lines sliced clean, like with a blade." Elliot nodded, slowly. "Could it have happened accidentally?" The tech shook his head. "No way." Whoever did this knew what they were doing. And they wanted you dead. By the time Elliot returned to his apartment, the clock read 12:17 a.m. He poured himself a scotch 2 fingers, no ice, and sat in silence at the kitchen island, the amber liquid catching the city lights behind him. He couldn't shake her face, or what little he had seen of it. The voice, the urgency, the certainty. Who was she? And why had she saved him? That night, long after the rain had stopped, Elliot lay in bed, unable to sleep. He stared at the ceiling, hearing the voice again and again. Don't get in the car. And for the first time in a long while, Elliot Grayson, the man who had everything, realized he might not know anything at all. The next morning brought a thin sheet of fog to Midtown Manhattan, wrapping the glass towers in quiet and chill. Elliot Grayson sat in his office on the 39th floor of the Grayson and Voss firm, but his eyes weren't on the skyline. They were fixed on the brake inspection report lying flat on his walnut desk. Deliberate tampering, it read. Lines sliced with a sharp tool, intentional, no mechanical failure. He stared at those words like they belonged to someone else's life. Usually, mornings were routine espresso, inbox, depositions, settlement calls. Today, he hadn't even touched his coffee. He opened the security dashboard on his desktop, scrolling through timestamps from the garage cameras. The feed cut off for 4 minutes the night before, right around the time he'd approached his car. When it came back on, the woman was gone. He leaned back, thumb pressed against his temple. Who the hell are you by noon? Curiosity overtook caution. He called down to building operations. Security, the voice said. This is Elliot Grayson. I need the name of the janitor working the garage level last night, around 10:30. Give me a second, sir. He could hear typing. A pause. Then, that would have been Marla Dean. She's on the night shift, 3 nights a week. Keeps to herself mostly. Good record. Something wrong. Elliot hesitated. No. Just wanted to thank her. He hung up without another word. That evening, Elliot left the office later than usual. Not for work reasons, he was stalling. The building's janitorial staff didn't usually cross paths with senior partners. They were shadows, silent, efficient, invisible by design. But tonight, he saw her. She was wiping down the stainless steel railing in the lobby. Same navy jacket, same cap pulled low. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, wisps falling along her neck. She didn't see him at first. Or maybe she did and chose not to show it. He cleared his throat. She paused, glancing up, her eyes narrowing just a touch. You, Elliot said, from last night. I remember, she replied, still wiping. You saved my life. She said nothing, just kept wiping. I mean it, he added, softer. You could have walked away. Let me get in that car. She stopped then, looked up fully. The light caught her face this time, not young, not old, worn, as if life had been heavy for longer than it should have been. You looked like the kind of man who never listens, she said quietly, but I had to try. Her voice wasn't bitter, just factual. Elliot smiled, a little embarrassed. Well, apparently, I do listen. Occasionally. She didn't smile back. How did you know about the breaks, he asked. Marla looked around, like checking if anyone else was listening. The lobby was nearly empty. I used to be someone who noticed things, she said finally. Still do. You learn to pay attention when no one's looking at you. He tilted his head, intrigued. That's a skill. She shrugged, not one that pays well. Elliot hesitated. Look, I'm not here to interrogate you. I'm just trying to understand why you'd bother. You don't know me. You're right, she said. I don't. And with that, she picked up her supply cart and began pushing it toward the service elevator. Wait, Elliot called after her. Can I buy you coffee sometime? She paused, looked over her shoulder. Why? He didn't have an answer. Not a good one. Anyway. She gave a tired little nod. I go to Merrick's Diner 2 blocks east after my shift. They open at 5. That's the best I can offer. And then she was gone again, swallowed by the elevator's closing doors. Elliot stood still for a long time. He didn't know what he'd expected. A thank you. A revelation closure. But instead, he felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Guilt, and something else, even stranger. Respect. That night, he typed her name into the firm's internal system. Dean, Marla, no results. He tried Google. A few pages in, something appeared. Marla Dean, former civil rights attorney, disbarred in 2017 following evidence mishandling in the Argonex chemical lawsuit. The headline hit like a stone. Elliot sat back, heart heavy. Argonex. The same case his firm had represented. The same case that had been fast-tracked to settlement under Patrick Voss's direction. And now, the janitor who had saved his life was a woman his firm may have helped destroy. Elliot sat motionless in his office, long after the city outside had come to life. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden squares across his mahogany desk, but it barely touched him. He was somewhere else entirely. On his screen, an old legal summary. Gray and clinical. Dean v. Argonex Corporation. Filed August 2016. Dismissed November 2016. That was it. Just 4 months. Buried under hundreds of other cases. But as Elliot clicked through the pages, the silence in the room grew heavier. He remembered the case vaguely. Small town. Toxic waste. A little girl. Grace Mulroney. Age 8. Died of leukemia. At the time, Elliot hadn't handled it directly. Patrick Voss had taken point. Elliot, as co-founder, only offered strategic oversight. He remembered a few meetings, a memo or two. Nothing that stood out, nothing that stayed, until now. He opened the archived files, scans of lab reports, witness statements, handwritten notes from a young attorney named Marla Dean. She had filed a report suggesting Argonex's chemicals contained carcinogenic levels of dioxins above legal thresholds. Elliot remembered that report, not its content, but the way Patrick had waved it off during a meeting. Sloppy science, Patrick had said, fabricated, emotional bait. Get it tossed before it grows legs. And it had been tossed. Marla Dean was later accused of falsifying evidence, disbarred, silenced. Back then, Elliot hadn't questioned any of it. Why would he? Patrick handled the evidence. Elliot focused on closing high-value clients. The system worked. The firm won. And a girl died. He stood up and walked to the window, his reflection merging with the city skyline beyond. The memory clawed at him, now sharp and uncomfortable. He remembered a photograph in one of the files. Grace's school portrait, freckles, missing front tooth, blonde pigtails. He had looked at that photo once. He hadn't looked long. He turned back to the desk and pulled out a folder, his personal file, the one no one else touched. He thumbed through pages until he found what he was looking for. Internal memo, September 9th, 2016. Subject dismissal of plaintiff evidence. Case Dean v. Argonex. He read it 3 times. The last line stuck. Ensure all external communications on this matter are filtered through Voss or legal counsel. No exceptions. No exceptions. No transparency. Just strategy. Later that afternoon, Elliot found himself in the firm's small archive room. The place smelled of dust and polished oak. A secretary passed him. Confused. Need help finding something. Mr. Grayson. No. Just checking something. He reached for a box labeled Dean V. Argonex and opened it. Inside was the full deposition Marla had written. Her words were professional, detailed, but beneath the lines, there was something else. You could hear it. Conviction, passion, a woman trying to be heard. And somewhere between page 17 and 18, Elliot felt a chill, because she had been right. Or at least, she hadn't sounded like someone trying to deceive. She'd sounded like someone desperate to warn people, just like she'd warned him in that garage. He returned to his office, sat down heavily, and for a moment, simply let the silence stretch. He rubbed his jaw, breathing out slow. What if they had been wrong? No, not just wrong. What if he had been? The thought wouldn't leave. He opened his email and began typing a message, not to Patrick, not to legal, to someone else, to Info Innocence, Outreach, org subject. Case inquiry, Marla Dean, Argonex 2016. He hesitated, then typed, I'm seeking information on a case from 2016 that may have involved prosecutorial misconduct. I have reason to believe the evidence used to disbar Marla Dean was tampered with, and I'd like to help re-examine the case. He stared at the message for a long while, then clicked send. That evening, he walked past the janitor's supply closet on the lower floor. It was closed, quiet. A sliver of light showed beneath the door. He paused, hand hovering. He didn't knock, just stood there for a moment, then turned and walked away. Merrick's Diner had that old, worn-out charm red vinyl booths, scuffed linoleum floors, a jukebox that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. At 5:07 a.m., the place was nearly empty, just a tired trucker sipping black coffee near the window, and a cook behind the counter flipping pancakes with the energy of a man who'd done this every day for 30 years. Marla Dean sat in the last booth, sipping tea with no sugar, staring into a chipped white mug like it held the answers to questions no one wanted to ask. Elliot Grayson stood just inside the door, out of place in his tailored overcoat and leather shoes. He hesitated. For a second, he considered turning around and leaving. Then she looked up. No surprise in her eyes. No welcome either. Just a simple nod toward the opposite seat. He sat down slowly. Didn't think you'd come, she said. Didn't think you'd invite me, he replied. She took another sip of her tea. I didn't. I said you could show up. That's not the same. He smiled faintly, but it faded fast. Fair enough. A pause. The waitress, a woman named Carol, judging by the name tag and the tired eyes, came by and poured him a coffee without asking. She gave Marla a small smile, then walked off. You come here often? He asked. 3 nights a week. After shift. It's quiet. And they don't ask questions. He stirred his coffee slowly. That's rare these days. Marla leaned back, watching him. So, what do you want? Mr. Grayson. He took a breath. I read the files. From 2016, I went back into the archive. Read your deposition. Your report. Everything. Her eyes darkened. She didn't move. I didn't know, he said quietly. Back then, I was told your data was false, that you'd manipulated it, and you believed them. She said, matter of fact? Yes, because it was easier. He didn't deny it. Marla looked down at her hands. They were steady, but the knuckles were pale, white from quiet tension. You think reading a few files is going to make a difference, she asked. You think one coffee makes this right? No, Elliot said. I don't. Then why are you here? He hesitated, looked around the diner at the empty booths, the smell of burnt toast in the air, the muffled hum of a city waking up. "Because I think you were telling the truth," he said. "And if I was part of what ruined your life, I want to help fix it." Marla let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Fix it," she echoed. "You can't fix what's already buried. Mr. Grayson, you ever watch a little girl cough blood into a napkin while her mom tells her it's just a cold? I have. Her name was Grace. She wanted to be a zookeeper." He looked down, ashamed. "She died in 2017. Marla continued. "No compensation, no justice. Just an apology letter from Argonex's PR team saying, 'We regret your loss.' That was it. Her mother brought it to court, like it meant something. They didn't even read it aloud. The silence after that was thick." "I'm sorry," Elliot said. Marla finally looked at him. Really looked, like she was searching his face for something. Why now, she asked. Why suddenly care about what happened 8 years ago? Elliot leaned forward, hands cupping his coffee mug. "Because last week, someone sliced the brake lines on my car. Because you saved my life when you had every reason not to. And because I realized I don't actually know what kind of man I've been." He didn't blink, didn't flinch. Marla's voice was quieter now. "You're a man who wins. That's who you were. In court, on paper, in contracts and boardrooms. And I was just the footnote that lost. You weren't a footnote." "No," she said. "Then why did it take a near-death experience for you to even remember my name?" That landed hard, but he didn't defend himself. He just nodded, slowly. "You're right." Another silence settled between them, not hostile this time, just tired. Like two people who'd both seen too much. Then Marla spoke again, softly. "There's still a file, one that never made it into the court record. It was pulled before the hearing, a scientist's analysis, independent, unedited. It confirmed everything I said." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "Where is it buried? I have a copy, but they'll call it inadmissible now." "It's too late." "No," Elliot said, more firmly than before. "It's not." Outside, the sky had turned pale gray. Morning was coming. Elliot reached into his coat pocket and placed a small, plain business card on the table. "My number," he said. "If you ever want to talk again, or do more than talk." Marla looked at the card but didn't touch it. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. He stood to leave. Halfway to the door, she called after him. "Mr. Grayson." He turned. "If you're serious," she said, "you better be ready to lose things." He nodded. "I think I already have." By the time Elliot reached his apartment that evening, a quiet hum had settled in his chest. Not panic, not yet, but the kind of hum you feel before a storm breaks when something isn't quite right, but you can't put your finger on it. He poured a drink. He didn't finish. Turned on the news. He didn't watch. Tried to sleep, but his thoughts were louder than the city outside. The next morning, he made a call, a quiet one. The auto technician, Lyle, met him back in the garage, mid-40s, bearded, didn't talk much unless he had something worth saying. "You asked me to take a second look," Lyle said, kneeling by the Bentley's undercarriage. "I brought a better scope this time." Elliot stood off to the side, arms folded. He wasn't dressed like a lawyer today. No tie, just a wool coat and a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there last week. Lyle examined the brake lines carefully, then sat back on his heels. "No question about it," he said. "Whoever did this wasn't improvising. This was surgical, blade work, straight through the line. Real clean. Elliot nodded slowly. Could someone have gotten access here? Through the service level, Lyle gave a half shrug. Garage security's decent, but not foolproof. A guy with clearance, or the right uniform could get in. Especially if no one's watching. And cameras. Already told your firm. Footage was wiped during that window. Someone covered their tracks. Elliot felt the hum in his chest again. Now it buzzed, sharp and steady. Someone hadn't just tried to kill him. Someone had planned it. Back upstairs, he opened his inbox, skipped past contracts and court filings. There was a message flagged anonymously. No subject line. Just a single sentence. If you care about the janitor, you'll back off. He stared at it for a long time, read it again. And again. Not back off or you'll get hurt. Not stay away from the Argonex case. But Marla. They mentioned her. That evening, Elliot sat alone in his office long after the lights outside had gone soft. The skyline flickered with quiet wealth towers lit like upright coffins. He kept hearing her voice from the diner. You'd better be ready to lose things. Maybe this was what she meant. He opened his encrypted storage, pulled up archive messages from 2016 internal notes between partners. There wasn't much, but there was a curious note. P. Voss will handle the outside consultant. Ensure files not logged through standard path. Legal compliance. Sept 2016 outside consultant. Unlogged path. Buried. Vague just enough to stay invisible. Patrick Voss had always been careful. Too careful. Elliot picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Paused on Patrick's name. Didn't call. Instead, he dialed someone else. Later that night, he stood across the street from the building where Marla Dean worked. She came out just past midnight, bundled in her navy jacket, messenger bag over one shoulder. She walked with purpose, not fast, not slow, just focused. A woman used to making herself unseen. He crossed the street to meet her. You're not supposed to be here, she said. I got a message. Her eyes narrowed. From who anonymous? But it mentioned you. Said if I keep digging, you'd pay the price. She blinked, and just for a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear she'd known worse, but something colder. Familiarity. They're watching me, she said. Still, after all these years, I think someone from inside the firm is involved, possibly Patrick. Marla gave a dry chuckle. That surprises you. No, Elliot admitted, but it scares me now. A beat. She looked at him. Really looked. This is what it feels like. Grayson, when you know the system isn't broken, it's working exactly how it was designed. They stood under the streetlight, just out of reach of the glare, surrounded by city silence and the rustling paper of a wind-blown coffee cup. I won't let anything happen to you, Elliot said. Marla turned toward him. Deadpan. Don't make promises this city can't keep. That night, back in his apartment, Elliot wrote down the name of the only man who might be able to trace the deleted video files. Jude Carver, former freelance digital forensics tech, ex-contractor for Voss's private IT ops. He hadn't seen Jude in 7 years. But Jude owed him a favor, and Elliot was ready to collect. The apartment was tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up bodega in the Bronx. 3rd floor. One window half covered in foil. Elliot climbed the narrow stairwell alone. The walls smelled faintly of fried onions and damp plaster. Each step creaked the kind of sound that made secrets nervous. He knocked twice. Nothing. Then, a voice from behind the door. Say your name. Elliot Grayson. A pause. The door opened a crack. Jude Carver looked worse than Elliot remembered. Gaunt face, deep circles under his eyes, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and an expression like he didn't trust gravity. "Grayson," he muttered, "of all the ghosts, good to see you too." Jude opened the door fully. Stepping aside, Elliot entered slowly. The place was dim, messy, but not filthy. Laptop open on a milk crate, cables snaked across the floor, a half-eaten sandwich on the window ledge. "Still living like a college freshman," Elliot said. Jude raised an eyebrow. Still pretending to have a soul Elliot didn't bite. He pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket and held it out. "This is the archive from the Argonex case. It includes digital copies of internal reports from 2016, some of which were never shown in court." Jude didn't move, and he said, "I need to know if anything was altered, especially the environmental analysis submitted by Marla Dean." Jude looked at him, finally, eyes sharp behind the scruff and sarcasm. "You mean the woman your firm burned?" Elliot nodded. "Yes. You're 6 years too late. I'm just on time." Jude finally took the drive, plugged it into his laptop. A soft hum filled the room. "Sit down," he said, pointing to an upside-down crate. Elliot sat. Jude's fingers moved fast, the way only people who'd lived half their lives in digital noise could. He pulled up metadata layers, timestamps, access logs. 30 minutes passed without a word. Then Jude leaned back. "Well, this is interesting." Elliot straightened. "The file, the one with the dioxin levels, it was modified on March 15th, 2016. That's 3 days before the court hearing," Elliot said. Jude nodded. "And the metadata says the file was edited not from Marla's device, not even from the legal aid office." He tapped the screen. "It came from a server in Tribeca, private IP address, registered to a firm called ClearPath Solutions, a third-party consultant company." Elliot's brows furrowed. "I know that name." "You should," Jude said. "They were hired by your partner, Voss." Elliot stared. The pieces clicked, sharp and brutal. "He hired them to tamper with the report." Jude nodded. "Looks that way." The document was edited, numbers smoothed out, risk levels lowered, scientific sources removed, then passed off as Marla's work. "Exactly." Elliot's stomach twisted. "And it gets better," Jude added. "ClearPath Solutions received a $95,000 payment the same week, transferred from an offshore account in the Caymans." Elliot looked up slowly. "You have access to that?" Jude gave a half smile. "Let's say I know where the footprints are, even when someone tries to clean them up." The air in the room felt heavier. "I need a copy of all of this," Elliot said. "Every trace, every connection to Voss." "We'll take it to the Innocence Outreach and the board." Jude raised a hand. "Hold on. You still think the board will side with you? I think they'll want to avoid scandal." "Grayson," Jude said, shaking his head. "They don't care about scandal. They care about profit, about keeping donors, clients, leverage. You bring this forward, they won't applaud you. They'll bury you next. I'm not doing it for them." Jude leaned back, eyes studying him now. "So, what changed? You used to be part of the machine." "I still am," Elliot said softly. "But maybe I can at least jam the gears before it crushes someone else." Jude turned away, copied the files. "You've got guts," he said. "But guts don't win against men like Voss. Strategy does. Then help me build one." Jude paused. Then handed over a second drive. "This one's clean, password protected. You'll need someone to verify the original data integrity. Get a third-party scientist. And for God's sake, don't keep this in your office." Elliot stood, gripping the drive like it might melt. "Thank you, Jude." "Don't thank me," Jude muttered. "You're just dragging us all back into the mess." Later that night, Elliot sat in his living room, lights low, laptop glowing on the coffee table. He opened an email to Innocence Outreach. I have newly recovered evidence suggesting falsification of data in the 2016 Argonex case, requesting legal review and forensic validation of files attached. He attached the encrypted archive, but before hitting send, he paused, then opened his messages, typed a single line to Marla. I have proof. We were right. Merrick's diner was quieter than usual that morning. A fine drizzle hung in the air, like breath that hadn't settled. Through the diner windows, the world looked a little blurred, like someone had taken an eraser to the skyline and softened its edges. Marla Dean sat at her usual booth, nursing a cup of green tea, both hands around the mug like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. Elliot arrived 10 minutes late. He looked different today. No coat, no polished shoes, no partner's briefcase, just a gray sweater, rolled sleeves, and eyes that hadn't quite slept. He slid into the booth wordlessly. Marla didn't speak either. She waited. The waitress came by, refilled her cup, glanced at Elliot. Coffee, she asked. No, he said. I won't be staying long. Marla raised an eyebrow. You texted me. She said, you said you had proof. I do. He pulled out a flash drive and set it on the table between them like it was heavier than it looked. Everything you said in 2016? It was true. The data, the risk assessments, even your scientific sources. She stared at the flash drive, didn't move. They doctored the files. Elliot continued. Voss hired a third-party firm, Clear Path Solutions, to modify your environmental analysis. They scrubbed out all the alarming numbers, deleted the original from the court submission folder. Marla's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He pressed on, gently. I traced the edits, got metadata from the servers. I even found the payment trail. Offshore account, 95 grand. Transferred the same week your case was dismissed. Still, she said nothing. Elliot's voice lowered. I was there, in that building, at that table, while your reputation, your name was being torn apart. And I didn't speak up. I didn't ask questions. Marla looked at him now, her gaze sharp, but not angry. Just tired. I told the truth, she said softly, and it ruined me. I know. You don't. She snapped, not loud, but firm. You sat on the other side of the courtroom. You left every night with a win in your pocket and no blood on your hands. I went home with the weight of a dying child's mother screaming outside the courthouse. Elliot's shoulders fell. He wasn't there to argue. I'm sorry, he said. And this time, it wasn't casual. It wasn't rehearsed. It was low and rough, like it had to tear its way through a part of him he hadn't used in years. I should have known. I should have seen. Marla looked down. Then, slowly, she reached for the flash drive, tucked it into her coat pocket without a word. I sent a copy to the Innocence Outreach, Elliot said. They're reviewing it now. I also have a scientist verifying the original analysis, the one you submitted, independent, unconnected. If it checks out, we have grounds to reopen. Marla gave a hollow laugh. Reopen what? Exactly. The trial. The girl's still dead. My license is gone. My father's gone. You think a retrial is going to undo all that? Elliot said nothing. Because no, he didn't. She continued. Do you know what I did after they took my license? I worked at a bookstore. Then I cleaned motel rooms. Then this, scrubbing marble floors while men in suits walked past like I was invisible, like I never had a voice. She shook her head. I don't want justice. I want a world where the truth matters before someone dies. Elliot nodded, slowly. Then let's help make that world, he said. She looked at him again. This time, longer, like she wasn't looking at a man she used to resent, but someone standing at the edge of something new, maybe fragile, maybe foolish, but trying. I don't trust you, she said. I don't expect you to, Elliot replied. I'm not sure I even want your help. I didn't come to offer help, he said. I came to offer whatever it is I have left that's still worth something. A beat. Then she leaned back and sighed. We'll need legal leverage, press coverage, and protection. Because if you're right, Patrick Voss won't just go quietly. I know. We're not in a courtroom this time. Grayson, I'm not a lawyer this time, he said. I'm just a man trying to make something right. Marla gave him a look that bordered on approval the first time since they'd met in that cold garage. She finished her tea. You're still paying for breakfast, she said. He smiled, gladly. The road to Pine Hollow was lined with birch trees, yellowing at the edges. October had just begun to breathe its chill into the upstate air. Marla sat in the passenger seat of Elliot's SUV, her arms folded, eyes fixed on the blur of trees. She hadn't said much since they left Manhattan. You sure she still lives here? Elliot asked, keeping his eyes on the winding road. Last I heard, she never left. They pulled into the gravel driveway of a modest two-story house, paint peeling, porch sagging. An old swing hung from a maple tree, its chain creaking in the wind. Margaret Mulroney answered the door. She looked older than her years, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. Her hair, once red, had turned mostly gray, pulled back in a rough bun. When she saw Marla, her mouth fell open, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. You have a lot of nerve coming here, she said. I know, Marla replied. I watched them tear you apart. Said you lied about my baby. I didn't. Margaret stared for a long moment, then stepped aside. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet, like it had learned to hold its breath. Margaret poured black coffee into chipped mugs and sat across from them at a cluttered kitchen table. A faded photograph of a girl with freckles and gapped teeth sat in a frame near the window. Grace would have been 16 this year, Margaret said, voice flat. I remember, Marla said, softly. She wanted to study animals, wrote a report about elephants, and cried when she learned they get hunted. The room fell silent. Then Elliot spoke. Mrs. Mulroney, we believe the original environmental data was falsified, not by Marla, by outside consultants hired by my former partner. Margaret looked at him with no warmth, no trust. Why now? Because we finally have proof, Elliot said. And because I think we can reopen the case. Margaret stared at him. You think that brings her back? No, he said quietly. But it might stop this from happening again. She turned to Marla. You brought lawyers into my home again. No, Marla said. I brought a man who used to be part of the problem, and now wants to be part of the answer. Margaret blinked, then stood. She opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder, old, worn, labeled Argonex in faded ink. I kept everything, she said. Their settlement offers, the press clippings, and this? She placed a small, spiral-bound notebook on the table, Grace's journal. She started writing it when she got sick, Margaret whispered. Didn't let me read it until the end. Marla opened it gently. The handwriting was uneven, a child's letters, but it was filled with drawings, trees with black roots, animals with missing fur, and always gray water. She knew, Marla said, voice cracking. She knew something was wrong. Margaret replied, and no one listened. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Elliot and Marla stood outside by the car. She gave us the original documents. Elliot said, unfiltered reports from Grace's pediatrician, water samples, records from the town's cancer registry. It's more than the courts ever saw, Marla murmured. We have to act fast. She turned to him. Do you still have contacts at the New York Herald 1 or 2? Elliot said. Then we go public. Before Voss knows we've left the city. Are you sure you're ready for that? Marla gave a half smile, tired, but resolute. I was ready 8 years ago. They just didn't let me speak. Back in the city, Elliot placed a call to Samantha Keene, a journalist he once represented in a defamation suit. She owed him a favor and her conscience had always been sharper than most. Elliot Grayson, she said when she picked up, didn't think I'd hear from you unless someone needed silencing. I need you to do the opposite, Elliot replied. What's the story? He exhaled, looked out at the skyline. One child, one corporation, one lie that nearly buried everything. There was a pause. Then she said, I'm listening. It hit the newsstands at 6:04 a.m., disbarred or destroyed inside the buried truth of the Argonex case. Byline Samantha Keene, investigative correspondent, the New York Herald by 8:80 a.m. It had trended on Twitter. By 10:30, it had crossed 500,000 shares. At noon, it was headline material on cable news. And by 2:00 p.m., Patrick Voss was on the phone with a PR firm in full-blown crisis mode. The article was damning. It named ClearPath Solutions. It traced payment trails. It laid out doctored reports, suppressed data, sealed memos. And most of all, it told Grace Mulroney's story in heartbreaking detail. There was a photo, the one Marla had held in her hands just days ago, of Grace feeding a goat at a petting zoo, smiling with front teeth missing. Underneath, she wanted to be a zookeeper. She died before her 9th birthday. In Elliot's office, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, clients, board members. Even his assistant was pale and stammering. You have 13 messages from the press, she said, and 2 from Mr. Voss. He's not pleased. I'm not answering, Elliot replied. He was calm, too calm, almost behind closed doors. He and Marla sat facing the flat screen on his wall, watching the reactions pour in. She did it, Marla said softly. Samantha actually did it. She owed me, Elliot replied. But she did it for the right reasons. Marla gave a small, sad smile. People are going to call me names again, she said, online, on TV, opportunist, fraud, race card player, you name it. They already did, Elliot said. Now they'll have to face the facts. By that evening, the Herald office had received 2 legal threats, one from Argonex, one from a shell firm linked to Voss. But they had nothing. The evidence was airtight. Marla's original report verified by an independent chemist. The altered metadata authenticated by Jude Carver's affidavit. The offshore payments traced through a whistleblower in ClearPath's accounting. Every piece was laid bare. At 9:23 p.m., Elliot received a message from a private number, one sentence. You're not untouchable. Neither is she. He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. I expected this, he said to Marla. I lived this, she replied. They walked out of the office and into the chilled Manhattan night. It had rained earlier. The sidewalk shimmered under streetlights like wet steel. You know this won't stop Voss, Marla said as they walked. I don't need to stop him, Elliot replied. I just need to keep the light on long enough for others to see what he's doing. And if he pushes back harder, Elliot paused. I'll push back louder. The next day, a protest formed outside the Argonex headquarters. Dozens of signs, Dozens of names, parents, survivors, former employees who'd been silenced. The story had opened a wound that never healed, and for the first time in years, people were angry with Marla, not at her. She watched it unfold from across the street, hood up, hands deep in her jacket pockets. Someone had written on a cardboard sign, "Justice for Grace." She blinked fast and turned away before Elliot could see her tears. Later that evening, a courier delivered a small manila envelope to Elliot's apartment. No return address, just his name, handwritten. Inside 3 photographs, grainy, surveillance quality. One of Elliot standing outside his firm, one of Marla walking through a subway turnstile, and one of Margaret Mulroney sitting on her porch. No note, no message, but the implication was loud. "You're being watched," Elliot said. Marla took the photos and stared at them long and hard. "This means they're scared," she said. He looked at her. "You don't seem afraid?" "I am," she replied, "but I'm not stopping." The church was small, unmarked, set between 2 brick buildings in the East Bronx, nearly swallowed by the city's forgetting. Marla sat alone in the back pew. The lights were dimmed, stained glass windows casting fractured colors on the wooden floor. A quiet hymn played faintly from the overhead speakers, scratchy and distant. She didn't come here often, only on days when the past knocked too hard to ignore. Elliot stood at the entrance for a moment, unsure if he should interrupt. Then she looked over her shoulder and gave a slow nod. He walked quietly to her row and sat beside her. They didn't speak at first. The silence was sacred. "This was his place," Marla said eventually. "Dad came here every Sunday, even when the rest of the world gave up." Elliot looked at the altar. Simple, humble, a single wooden cross with a cloth draped over it. "Your father was a cop, right?" She nodded. "Nathaniel Reed, NYPD, 26 years in the force. Never took a bribe. Never ignored a call. The kind of man who read bedtime stories in uniform and made his own pancakes from scratch." She gave a small, fond laugh that vanished as quickly as it came. But he started asking questions about funding, quotas, the way certain neighborhoods were always targeted. Her fingers tightened around the bench edge. They didn't like that, so they reassigned him. Desk duty. Then they leaked false misconduct allegations. Elliot turned to her, brows knitting. He was forced out. Technically, he resigned. She said, "But we both knew what it really was." Her voice lowered. "He died 2 years later. Stroke. Fast. Quiet. No pension. No honors. A long breath. I never buried him properly. Just filed the death certificate and paid the cremation bill." Elliot looked at her. "I'm sorry." Marla didn't respond. She pulled a small item from her coat, a worn badge in a cracked leather holder. It glinted under the church light. "I used to carry this when I went to court," she said. "Felt like he was with me, watching." She turned it over in her palm. "After the disbarment, I stopped. A pause. Now, I'm not sure if I carry it because of him, or in spite of him." Elliot's voice was gentle. "He'd be proud of you." She scoffed softly. "Proud of a janitor fighting the same system that destroyed him." "No," Elliot said. "Proud of a woman who didn't give up when no one believed her. Who still walks through fire and doesn't ask to be carried." Marla blinked, looking away quickly. The stained glass flickered as clouds passed overhead. "You ever feel like you're screaming underwater?" she asked. "Like every word comes out silent, and even when people look at you, they're looking through you." Elliot nodded slowly. "I do now." They sat in silence again, 2 people grieving things they couldn't fix. in a world too fast to mourn properly. Finally, Marla stood. We need to go. Where? There's one last piece of this puzzle, she said, and it's not in court records. Where is it? She turned to him. It's buried in someone else's guilt. They stepped into the fading light of late afternoon. A chill had crept into the wind, that early November kind, where winter starts whispering through alleyways. Marla stopped at the curb. She turned, held out her father's badge. Here, she said. Elliot blinked. I can't take that. You can, she said, just for a little while. Remind yourself what justice is supposed to look like. He took it, gently. It felt heavy in his palm. Not from metal, from memory. It started with a shattered window. Elliot arrived at his apartment just after 10 p.m. The hallway lights flickered, a detail he barely noticed until he opened his door and found glass glittering like ice across the floor. Living room window, broken. A rock in the middle of the carpet. A note wrapped around it. 6 words. Printed in all caps, you should have stayed a lawyer. 2 floors down. The security guard had heard nothing. The cameras, conveniently offline. Elliot didn't call the police. He knew better. This wasn't a random break-in. It was a message. The next morning, he met Marla outside her building. She was already pacing, phone in hand. They slashed my tires, she said. All 4. Broad daylight. They hit my apartment, Elliot replied. Their eyes met. This wasn't noise anymore. It was war. Later that day, Elliot made a move he had sworn never to. He walked into the law firm of Grayson and Voss. As an outsider, the receptionist blinked when she saw him. Mr. Grayson. Not anymore. He said, Is Patrick in? She hesitated. He's in the conference room. Elliot didn't wait for permission. Patrick Voss stood at the head of the table, surrounded by junior partners. When Elliot entered, the conversation stopped cold. Elliot, Patrick said smoothly. What a surprise. Not really, Elliot said. We both knew this day was coming. Patrick gestured for the juniors to leave. They filed out quietly. Now it was just them. 2 men, 1 past, and a truth waiting to be spoken aloud. You leaked the story, Patrick said, pouring himself a glass of water. Yes? You gave classified case files to the press. You violated NDAs, broke firm protocol. You've implicated this entire firm in criminal misconduct. Elliot nodded once. Patrick's smile thinned. You always had a conscience, Elliot. That was your weakness. Elliot stepped closer. No, Patrick. My weakness was letting you speak for me. A pause. Patrick set down his glass. You think exposing me will change anything? I have friends on every board, judge in every circuit. You're not fighting a man, Elliot. You're fighting the infrastructure. Then I'll tear it down one beam at a time. Patrick's voice hardened. You're not untouchable. That woman you're dragging into this, she's just collateral. Elliot's fists clenched. You come near her again, and I will bury you. Not in court. In the court of public damnation. You think truth wins, Patrick sneered. Truth is just a PR strategy now. Elliot stepped forward, his voice low and cold. No, truth is a reckoning, and it's here. He turned and walked out without another word. That night, Marla found a man following her through the subway tunnel. She stopped walking, turned slowly. I know who sent you, she said calmly. The man paused, then vanished back into the shadows. She didn't run. She kept walking, because fear had no room left in her. Back at her apartment, she sat with Elliot in silence, the kind of silence that came when words had been used up. and all that remained was resolve. "They're trying to scare us," Elliot said. Marla nodded, and he met her gaze. "They're almost succeeding." She gave a small, bitter smile. "Then we're getting close." The next morning, Elliot received a call from Innocence Outreach. "We've reviewed the data," the director said. "It's authentic. If you're willing, we'd like to file a formal motion to reopen the Argonex case under wrongful prosecution." Elliot gripped the phone tightly. "And Marla's license, we can recommend reinstatement if the judge agrees." Hope crept into the corner of his voice. "Do it." As they walked through the courthouse steps 2 days later, flashbulbs lit up the steps. Reporters crowded them, microphones shoved toward their faces. Marla held her head high. Elliot said nothing, because sometimes silence wasn't cowardice, it was focus. They didn't come to speak. They came to reclaim what had been stolen. The courtroom was colder than expected. High ceilings, marble columns, everything designed to feel important but somehow still indifferent, like truth had been traded here too many times to feel holy anymore. Marla Dean sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands steady, her gaze calm. No longer the woman haunted by a courtroom, but the one who had chosen to return. Beside her, Elliot Grayson, not in a suit, not in armor, just a man stripped of legacy, but not of purpose. Across the aisle sat Patrick Voss, flanked by his legal team. He didn't look nervous. He looked inconvenienced. That would change. The judge entered. The hearing began. It was not a trial, not yet. This was a petition to reopen. A chance to bring the Argonex case back into the light. Samantha Keene's article was entered into the record. So were the financial documents, metadata evidence, and the full verified report from 2016. But none of that was the moment that broke the room. It was a small, spiral notebook, Grace Mulroney's journal. Margaret Mulroney took the stand. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. Her voice was quiet and sure. "My daughter knew something was wrong," she said. "She drew black trees, gray water. She told me her bones hurt before the bruises ever showed." She held the notebook up. "I don't need justice for her anymore. I need it for every mother still being lied to." Even Patrick Voss looked down then. The courtroom was silent. Then Marla rose, walked to the center of the room, and stood still for a long moment. "When I stood here 8 years ago," she began, "I believed the system would protect the truth. I thought credentials, data, and logic would be enough. A beat. They weren't." She turned to the judge. "What was taken from me wasn't just a career. It was faith in institutions, in law, in the idea that if you fight hard enough, you'll be heard." She pointed to the stack of evidence. "I didn't falsify that report. I submitted a truth people weren't ready to admit, that a billion-dollar company poisoned a community and paid to stay clean." She turned to Voss. "You helped them. You made sure the story stayed buried. And you did it because it was easy. Because people like me, black, female, persistent, are easier to break than to face." A murmur passed through the room. She didn't flinch. And still, she said, "I'm standing here." When she returned to her seat, Elliot leaned over and whispered, "You were incredible." She didn't smile, but her fingers brushed his, just once. The judge took everything under advisement. The ruling would come later, but the air had changed. Voss walked out like a man who suddenly knew gravity had remembered him. 3 weeks passed. Then the ruling came. Motion to reopen the case is approved. Disbarment ruling is vacated pending formal review. The Argonex case would go back to trial. Marla Dean would have her license restored. And Patrick Voss. He was now under federal investigation for evidence tampering. obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud a court of law. The press exploded again. But this time, the story was different. It wasn't a fall from grace. It was a rise from silence. Elliot and Marla met again on the courthouse steps. No cameras, no fanfare, just the two of them. "You get your badge back," he said quietly. "I didn't come back for the badge," she replied. "I came back for the girl who never got to grow up." He nodded. "And your father?" She looked up at the sky, a late winter sun peeking through. "I think he's proud now." As they walked away, Elliot stopped, pulled something from his pocket. Nathaniel Reed's badge. "I think this belongs to you again," he said. Marla took it, held it for a moment, then shook her head. "No," she said. She pressed it back into his palm. "Keep it. Remind yourself what justice is supposed to look like. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes in the quiet courage of someone who refuses to stay silent." Marla Dean was never just a lawyer. She was a daughter, a voice for the forgotten, a reminder that standing up costs something, especially when you don't look like the people in power, when your truth makes others uncomfortable. And Elliot Grayson. He reminds us that redemption isn't loud or easy, but it's possible when we choose to listen, to change, to act. This story isn't only about two people reclaiming what was taken. It's about all of us, the parts we bury, the wrongs we've accepted as normal, and the silent witnesses we've become. Discrimination doesn't always wear a name tag. Sometimes it hides in law offices, headlines, or the people who walk past janitors without ever looking twice. So ask yourself, what would you do if you saw someone being erased? If this story moved you even just a little, help us share it. Like, comment, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because the next story might just be yours, and someone out there is waiting to feel seen.